The auctioneer's gavel froze mid-air as Rose Whitehawk clutched her 5-year-old son tighter, his small fingers gripping the sacred eagle feather, the last remnant of their Cherokee heritage. The crowd of rough miners and saloon owners leered at them like vultures eyeing fresh carrion. "$75 for the pair!" bellowed Jake, Iron Fist Murphy, his scarred hands already reaching toward them. But thunder of hoofbeats shattered the October stillness. A lone rider on a black stallion emerged through the dust cloud, his weathered face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. The crowd parted like the Red Sea as he dismounted with fluid grace. "I'll take them both," his voice cut through the stunned silence. $200. Cash money. Gasps rippled through the gathering. Rose's green eyes met piercing blue ones that seemed hauntingly familiar. Little Bear whispered in Cherokee, "Mama, the sad man came back." Rose's blood turned to ice. Her son had never seen this stranger before. Or had he? Who was this mysterious cowboy, and why did her child recognize him? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The stranger's boots clicked against the wooden platform as he approached Sheriff Briggs with deliberate slowness. Rose watched his every movement, noting the way he carried himself, like a man who had seen too much and survived worse. His leather duster bore the dust of countless miles, and his gun belt hung with the practiced ease of someone comfortable with violence. "Samuel Ironwood," he introduced himself to the sheriff, producing a leather pouch heavy with gold coins. "I believe 200 settles the debt and then some." Rose's breath caught. That name, she had heard it whispered in Thomas's fevered final words 3 years ago. "Trust the ghost walker when he comes," her dying husband had gasped. The Cherokee elders called him by that name, speaking of a man who moved like smoke through the territories, hunting those who preyed on their people. Little Bear, despite the chaos around them, remained unnaturally calm in her arms. His dark eyes fixed on the stranger with an intensity that chilled Rose to the bone. How could a 5-year-old look at a complete stranger with such recognition, such longing? "Mama Rose," the child whispered, using the name that had always puzzled her. Other children called their mothers simply Mama, but Little Bear had always added her name as if distinguishing her from someone else. "Uncle Ghost came for us, just like the dream people said." Uncle Ghost. Rose's knees nearly buckled. She had never told anyone about Thomas's final words, certainly never mentioned them to Little Bear. Yet somehow, her son knew this man by the same Cherokee name the dying had spoken. Samuel's weathered hands counted out the coins with mechanical precision, but Rose caught the slight tremor in his fingers when Little Bear spoke. Whatever connection existed between them, it affected this mysterious cowboy as deeply as it did her son. Sheriff Briggs snatched the money with greedy haste. "Sold to Mr. Ironwood. Pleasure doing business." His corrupt smile made Rose's skin crawl. She had learned to recognize that look during the months of legal battles after Thomas's wrongful imprisonment, the expression of men who profited from others' suffering. As Samuel helped her down from the platform, his touch was gentle, almost reverent. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his voice carrying an accent that spoke of long nights under stars and longer days in the saddle, "I give you my word, no harm will come to you or the boy under my protection." But protection from what? And why did Little Bear cling to this stranger's hand as if he had been waiting his entire young life for this moment? Rose glanced back at the dispersing crowd, catching sight of Jake Murphy's furious glare. Something told her their troubles were far from over, and this mysterious Samuel Ironwood, this ghost walker, held secrets that could either save them or destroy what little remained of their shattered world. The autumn wind carried the scent of approaching storms, and Rose couldn't shake the feeling that the tempest ahead would be far more dangerous than any weather the Oklahoma Territory could conjure. The wagon wheels creaked steadily as they rolled away from Dust Creek, leaving behind a cloud of red Oklahoma dust and the whispered speculation of onlookers. Samuel had procured supplies with the efficiency of a man accustomed to sudden departures: blankets, food, water barrels, and a small bag of peppermint sticks that he'd quietly slipped to Little Bear when he thought Rose wasn't watching. "Where are we going?" Rose asked, adjusting her grip on Little Bear, who had fallen asleep against her chest with unusual ease. The child's peaceful slumber struck her as odd. He typically fought sleep when anxious or in unfamiliar situations. "My place," Samuel replied, his eyes fixed on the trail ahead. "Red Rock Canyon, about 2 days' ride. It's quiet there. Safe." The way he emphasized the last word suggested their current situation was anything but. Rose studied his profile, the strong jaw shadowed with several days' stubble, the lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into too many sunrises, the slight scar running from his left temple to his cheekbone. This was a man who had lived hard and survived harder. Why? The question hung between them like smoke. Why pay so much for strangers? Samuel was quiet for so long that Rose wondered if he'd heard her. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old ghosts. "Your husband saved my life once. Figured I owed him." Little Bear stirred in her arms, murmuring something in Cherokee that sounded like a lullaby. Rose's blood chilled. She had never taught him that particular song. It was an old one, something her grandmother might have sung, but the melody was hauntingly familiar, as if heard in dreams. "You knew Thomas?" Rose's voice barely above a whisper. "We rode together briefly. Good man." "Heard about what happened to him." Samuel's knuckles whitened as he gripped the reins tighter. "Heard about the fire, too." Rose's heart stopped. "What fire?" Samuel's head snapped toward her, his blue eyes wide with something that looked like panic. I misspoke. The fever, I meant. Heard he died of fever in jail." But Rose had caught the slip, and more importantly, she had seen Little Bear's reaction. Even in sleep, the child had whimpered and pressed closer to her when Samuel mentioned fire. What fire was he talking about? And why did her son react as if he remembered something terrible? As evening approached, Samuel made camp beside a small creek lined with cottonwoods. He moved with practiced efficiency, building a fire, tending to the horses, setting up their bedrolls with military precision. Little Bear awoke as the flames danced to life, immediately gravitating toward Samuel with an ease that made Rose's chest tighten with unnamed fear. "Uncle Ghost," the boy said simply, settling beside the man as if he belonged there. Samuel's face went pale. "What did you call me?" "Uncle Ghost," Little Bear repeated, poking at the fire with a stick. "That's what Mama Ayana called you in the dream songs." Rose's world tilted. "Who is Mama Ayana?" "Little Bear, you've never mentioned anyone by that name before." The child looked up at her with those unnaturally wise eyes. "She sings to me when the fire dreams come. She says Uncle Ghost will bring us home when the bad men stop looking." Samuel stood abruptly, walking to the edge of their camp. Rose could see his shoulders shaking, whether from emotion or something else, she couldn't tell. When he returned, his face was composed, but his eyes held a pain so deep it took her breath away. "Children have vivid imaginations," he said carefully. "Sometimes dreams feel real to them." But Rose was no fool. She had raised Little Bear from infancy, and this was no child's imagination. These were memories, impossible memories that her son shouldn't possess. That night, as Little Bear slept between them, Rose lay awake listening to the coyotes call across the plains. Samuel's breathing never settled into the rhythm of sleep, and twice she caught him watching the boy with an expression of such longing and regret that it broke her heart. Near dawn, Little Bear sat up suddenly, his eyes still closed, and began speaking in fluent Cherokee. The words flowed like water, complex phrases and traditional expressions that Rose had never taught him. Samuel sat up too, his face stricken as he listened to whatever the child was saying in his sleep. When Little Bear finally quieted and settled back into normal sleep, Rose whispered, "What did he say?" Samuel's voice was raw when he answered. He said he remembers the fire. He remembers his first mama calling for help. And he remembers a man carrying him away while she burned. Rose's blood turned to ice. "That's impossible. Little Bear has been with me since he was barely 2 years old. His parents died of cholera. There was no fire." Samuel met her eyes across the dying embers, and what she saw there terrified her more than any threat Jake Murphy could have posed. "Rose," he said quietly, "there's something you need to know about that boy, something I should have told you 3 years ago." The morning sun cast long shadows across Red Rock Canyon as Samuel's cabin came into view, nestled against towering sandstone cliffs like a secret whispered by the desert itself. Rose had expected something crude and temporary, but what she saw took her breath away. A solid log structure with a covered porch, flower boxes beneath shuttered windows, and a small garden plot carefully tended despite the approaching autumn. "It's beautiful," she breathed, then caught herself. Why should she care about the aesthetics of what was essentially her prison? Because that's what this was, wasn't it? No matter how Samuel dressed it up with kindness and gold coins, she was still a woman with no choices, dependent on a stranger's mercy. Little Bear had awakened as they approached, and his reaction chilled Rose to the bone. The child sat up straight in her arms, his eyes wide with recognition, and pointed toward a specific window on the cabin's east side. "That's where the morning light comes in," he said with certainty. "And there's a rocking horse inside, brown with a white mane." Samuel's hands tightened on the rein so hard the leather creaked. Rose felt her stomach drop. "Little Bear, how could you possibly know that?" But the child was already squirming to get down, running toward the cabin as if coming home after a long journey. Samuel helped Rose from the wagon, his touch gentle, but his face gray with what looked like dread. "I can explain," he began, but Rose was already following her son, her heart hammering against her ribs. The front door stood slightly ajar. Little Bear pushed it open and disappeared inside with a whoop of joy that echoed strangely in the silence. Rose stepped across the threshold and felt the world shift beneath her feet. The cabin was immaculate, furnished with care and obvious wealth, but that wasn't what stopped her cold. It was the toys. Everywhere she looked, wooden blocks scattered near the fireplace, a small pair of boots by the door, a child's coat hanging from a peg at exactly Little Bear's height. And there, in the corner, just as her son had described, stood a beautiful rocking horse with a brown body and flowing white mane. "Little Bear, don't touch," Rose started, but her son was already climbing onto the horse, rocking back and forth with the easy familiarity of long practice. "See, Mama Rose, he kept it for me, just like he promised." The blood roared in Rose's ears. She spun to face Samuel, who stood in the doorway watching Little Bear with an expression of profound anguish and desperate hope. "What is this place?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "Why do you have a child's things? Why does my son act like he's been here before?" Samuel removed his hat, running his fingers through his graying hair. "Rose, please, sit down." "Let me—" "No!" The word exploded from her with such force that Little Bear stopped rocking and looked at her with worried eyes. She forced herself to lower her voice. "Tell me now. What aren't you saying?" Samuel moved slowly to a wooden chest against the far wall. With trembling hands he opened it and withdrew a daguerreotype in a silver frame. He held it toward Rose like an offering, or perhaps a confession. The photograph showed a young Cherokee woman with kind eyes and long braided hair, holding a toddler who looked exactly like Little Bear had at that age. Standing beside them, his arm around the woman's shoulders, was Samuel, younger, cleaner shaven, but unmistakably him. Rose's legs gave out. She sank into the nearest chair, staring at the impossible image. Who are they? Ayanna, Samuel said, his voice barely audible. My sister, and her son, Yonah, the Cherokee name for Little Bear. The cabin spun around Rose. Little Bear slid off the rocking horse and came to her, placing his small hands on her knees with the serious expression he wore when trying to comfort her. Don't cry, Mama Rose, he said softly. I told you the dream people would help Uncle Ghost find us. This is impossible, Rose whispered, though even as she spoke, pieces were clicking into place with horrible clarity. Little Bear's inexplicable knowledge of Cherokee customs she'd never taught him, his comfort with Samuel, his strange references to dreams and memories that weren't his own. Little Bear is my son. I've raised him since the night of the fire, Samuel finished quietly. October 3rd, 1882. 3 years ago, almost to the day. Rose's world cracked down the middle. There was no fire. His parents died of cholera. I took him in because no one else would care for him. Samuel knelt beside her chair, his blue eyes swimming with unshed tears. Rose, listen to me carefully. 3 years ago, I was a Pinkerton detective investigating cattle rustling in this territory. Your husband Thomas was one of the men I was tracking, but I discovered he was innocent, being framed by the real thieves. Thomas was wrongfully accused, Rose said numbly. I know that part. What you don't know is that the night before I could present evidence to clear him, the real rustlers struck again. They burned my sister's cabin in retaliation for my investigation. Ayanna died in that fire, but her son survived because— Samuel's voice broke completely. Little Bear climbed into Rose's lap, wrapping his small arms around her neck. Because you saved me, Mama Rose. You pulled me out of the fire when Mama Ayanna couldn't wake up anymore. Rose's vision blurred as memories she had buried deep began to surface. That terrible night 3 years ago, she had been working as a midwife, riding home late when she saw flames in the distance. She had found a cabin engulfed, heard a child screaming inside. Without thinking, she had rushed in, finding a toddler trapped beneath a fallen beam, his mother already beyond help. I thought he was an orphan, she whispered. There was no one else around. The woman was dead, and I never saw. I was tracking the rustlers that night, Samuel said. By the time I got back, the cabin was ashes and Ayanna was dead. I found signs of the child, but no body. I thought. He looked at Little Bear with wonder and grief. I thought my nephew had died too. Little Bear looked between the two adults with the patience of someone much older than 5. I tried to tell you about Uncle Ghost, Mama Rose, but you said dreams weren't real. Rose felt something fundamental shifting inside her chest, not breaking, but rearranging itself into a new shape that was both painful and strangely right. So you've been looking for us? For 3 years? Every day, Samuel admitted. Following every lead, chasing every rumor. When I heard about a Cherokee woman with a young boy facing debt problems in Dust Creek, I had to see. And when I saw Little Bear, his voice caught. I knew immediately. He's the image of Ayanna at that age. Little Bear patted Rose's cheek gently. I have 2 mamas now. One in the dream songs and one who holds me when the nightmares come. and Uncle Ghost will keep us all safe." Rose looked at this child she had loved as her own, raised as her own, and realized that the bonds between them hadn't weakened with this revelation. They had deepened. Little Bear was still her son in every way that mattered. But now he was also Samuel's nephew, the last piece of a family torn apart by violence and circumstances beyond anyone's control. "So what happens now?" she asked quietly. Samuel's eyes held hers with desperate intensity. "Now we heal. All of us. Together." But even as hope flickered in Rose's chest, she noticed Samuel's hand resting protectively on a rifle mounted above the fireplace, and she realized their troubles were far from over. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both strange and surprisingly natural. Rose found herself falling into the routines of Samuel's remote canyon home with an ease that disturbed her. She cooked meals on his well-maintained stove, mended clothes by the large window that caught the morning light, and watched Little Bear rediscover toys and hiding places he remembered with unsettling accuracy. Samuel proved to be a considerate host, giving her space while remaining nearby enough to help with heavy chores. He spoke little about his years as a Pinkerton detective, but Rose caught glimpses of that harder man in the way he constantly scanned the horizon and kept his weapons meticulously maintained. Whatever had driven him to this isolated canyon, she sensed it involved more than just grief over his sister's death. "Why did you leave the Pinkertons?" she asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Little Bear chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. Samuel's jaw tightened. "They wanted me to do things that went against my conscience, frame innocent men to protect their wealthy clients' interests. When I refused to falsify evidence against your husband, they made it clear my services were no longer required." "So you became a bounty hunter?" "Of sorts. I hunt the men they protect. The real criminals who hide behind money and corrupt badges." His blue eyes reflected the dying light like chips of ice. "Men like Sheriff Briggs and his associates." Rose felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert evening air. "You think they'll come looking for us?" "I think they'll come looking for me. The question is when, and whether they'll figure out where we are before I'm ready for them." Little Bear ran up to the porch, his small hands cupped around a captured firefly. "Look, Uncle Ghost, I caught one of the night stars." Samuel's expression softened immediately. "That's beautiful, Yona. But remember what your mama Ayana taught you about the night stars? That they need to be free to carry messages between the earth and sky," Little Bear recited solemnly. He opened his hands, and the firefly danced away into the darkness. "There, little star. Tell Mama Ayana we're all together now." Rose's throat tightened. The easy familiarity between Samuel and Little Bear spoke of shared memories she had never been part of. For 3 years she had been this child's entire world, but now she was watching him reconnect with a past she had unknowingly stolen from him. "Mama Rose, why are you sad?" Little Bear climbed into her lap, his dark eyes full of concern. "I'm not sad, sweetheart. Just thinking." "About the fire dreams?" Rose startled. She had been having disturbing dreams since arriving at the canyon, fragmented images of flames and smoke, a woman's voice calling for help, the weight of a small body in her arms. "How did you know?" Little Bear touched her face gently. "You talk in your sleep now, just like you did when we first came to live together. You called for someone named Thomas and for the lady in the fire." Samuel leaned forward, his attention sharp. "Rose, are you remembering that night?" She nodded reluctantly. "Pieces. I blocked so much of it out. The trauma of losing Thomas, the chaos of suddenly having a child to care for. But being here, seeing how Little Bear responds to everything." She looked at Samuel with growing certainty. "You were there, weren't you? At the cabin?" Samuel's silence was answer enough. I saw a rider in the distance when I was carrying Little Bear away from the flames. Someone on a dark horse. That was you. I was tracking the men who set the fire. By the time I reached the cabin, it was too late to save Ayanna, but I saw you running with the child. I followed at a distance to make sure you were safe, then lost your trail in the smoke. Samuel's voice was heavy with regret. I should have approached you then, should have told you who he was. Why didn't you? Because you were clearly caring for him, and I was a stranger with blood on my hands and vengeance in my heart. I told myself he was better off with you until I could make the territory safe for him. I never imagined it would take 3 years. Little Bear had fallen asleep in Rose's arms during their conversation, exhausted by the day's adventures. As she carried him inside to bed, Rose caught Samuel watching them with an expression of such longing it made her chest ache. This man had lost his sister, spent years hunting her killers, and believed his nephew was dead. Now, having found them both, he seemed afraid to claim too much happiness, as if expecting it to be snatched away again. The next morning brought the first real test of their fragile family dynamic. Little Bear was playing in the garden when he suddenly went rigid, staring at something in the distance. Rose looked up from her mending to see 3 riders approaching slowly across the desert floor. Samuel appeared from the barn immediately, his hand resting on his gun. "Rose, take Little Bear inside. Now!" But the child shook his head, pointing at the riders. "It's okay, Uncle Ghost. That's Grandfather Crow Feather." Rose squinted at the approaching figures and felt her heart skip. The lead rider was indeed an elderly Cherokee man she recognized. Thomas Crow Feather, a respected elder who had occasionally visited their small community in Dust Creek. Behind him rode 2 younger Cherokee men she didn't know. "Samuel Ironwood," Crow Feather called as he dismounted, "also known as Ghost Walker to our people." Samuel relaxed slightly but kept his defensive posture. "Elder Crow Feather, you're a long way from the Cherokee lands?" The old man's weathered face creased into what might have been a smile. "I go where the spirits guide me, and they have been whispering much about this place lately." His sharp eyes moved to Rose and Little Bear. "About the woman who saved our lost child, and the man who finally brought them home." Little Bear ran to the elder without hesitation. "Grandfather, did you come to see our new family?" Crow Feather lifted the boy easily, studying his face with obvious affection. "I came because the Cherokee Nation needs to know what happened to Ayanna's son. There are those who believe he died in the fire, others who suspect he lives but worry he has been lost to our people forever." Rose felt a stab of fear. "Are you here to take him away?" The elder's eyes were kind but shrewd. "I am here to see with my own eyes how the spirits have woven this story together, to understand what the Creator intends for this unusual family." One of the younger men spoke up. "There are rumors that Sheriff Briggs has been asking questions about the boy, offering rewards for information about a Cherokee woman and child who disappeared from Dust Creek." Samuel's face hardened. "How much of a reward?" "Enough to interest men who don't ask questions about why a lawman wants to find a woman and child so badly." Rose felt the blood drain from her face. "They're hunting us." "Not us," Samuel corrected grimly. "Me. They know I have evidence that can destroy their cattle-rustling operation and expose the corruption that reaches all the way to the territorial capital. They figure if they can get to you and Little Bear, they can force me to trade my evidence for your lives." Crow Feather set Little Bear down gently. "Then it is good we came when we did." The Cherokee Nation does not abandon its children, even when they find themselves in unusual circumstances. "What does that mean?" Rose asked. The elder smiled. "It means, daughter, that if you are willing, you and the child can claim sanctuary under Cherokee law. Samuel Ironwood's grandmother was Cherokee. His blood gives him rights among our people as well. As a family unit, you would be under our protection." Little Bear clapped his hands. "Can we, Mama Rose? Can we be real Cherokee?" Rose looked at Samuel, seeing hope and fear warring in his eyes. "What would that mean, practically?" One of the younger men answered, "It means Cherokee justice for those who threaten our people. It means safe passage through Cherokee lands. It means a community that will stand between you and anyone who wishes you harm." "But," Crowfeather added with the wisdom of years, "it also means accepting that this child belongs not just to you, but to all our people. That his future will be tied to both worlds, Cherokee and white, and that he will need to learn to walk in both." Little Bear tugged on Rose's skirt. "I already walk in both, Mama Rose. You taught me the white world, and the dream songs taught me the Cherokee world. Now Uncle Ghost can teach me the in-between world." Samuel knelt beside the boy. "The in-between world? The place where people like you live. People who protect others even when it's hard. People who keep searching even when they're tired. People who know that family isn't just blood. It's choice and love and never giving up." Rose stared at this child, this wise, impossible child who had somehow become the center of her universe. In his simple words, she heard an acceptance that had eluded her for days. Little Bear didn't see their situation as complicated or tragic. To him, it was simply an expansion of the family he had always known he possessed. "Yes," she said quietly, looking first at Little Bear, then at Samuel, then at the Cherokee elders who had ridden so far to offer sanctuary. "Yes, we accept Cherokee protection, all of us. As a family." Crowfeather nodded approvingly. "Then it is settled. But you should know Briggs and his men are perhaps 2 days behind us. We saw their dust on the horizon as we approached the canyon. Whatever stand you plan to make, it must be soon." Samuel's expression turned grim. "Then we don't have time for a traditional Cherokee adoption ceremony." "Who said anything about traditional?" Crowfeather's eyes twinkled with mischief. "The spirits work in their own time and way. Sometimes the most sacred ceremonies are the ones born from necessity and sealed with blood." As if summoned by his words, the sound of distant gunfire echoed across the canyon walls. Samuel was on his feet immediately, his hand on his weapon. "They found us sooner than expected," he said grimly. "Rose, take Little Bear to the root cellar. Elder Crowfeather, we'll stand and fight beside you," the old man finished calmly. "The Cherokee have been protecting their own from corrupt lawmen for generations. Today will be no different." But as Rose gathered Little Bear in her arms, she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was coming would test more than their ability to defend themselves. It would test whether this makeshift family, born from tragedy and held together by hope, could survive the violence that had created it. Little Bear pressed his face against her neck as she carried him toward the cabin. "Don't be scared, Mama Rose. Uncle Ghost and Grandfather Crowfeather won't let the bad men hurt us." Rose wished she shared his confidence. But as more gunshots rang out across the desert, she realized that faith might be the only weapon they had left. The gunfire grew closer as Rose pressed Little Bear into the cramped root cellar beneath the cabin's floorboards. The space smelled of earth and preserved vegetables, a stark contrast to the acrid smoke that had begun drifting through the canyon. Above them, she could hear Samuel and the Cherokee men moving with urgent efficiency, dragging furniture to barricade windows and checking weapons. "Mama Rose, I'm scared," Little Bear whispered, his small body trembling against hers in the darkness. "I know, sweetheart. But Uncle Ghost won't let anything happen to us." Rose tried to keep her voice steady, but her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. Through the thin floorboards, she could hear Samuel giving orders. "They'll approach from the east. It's the only path wide enough for horses. Crowfeather, can your men cover the north ridge?" Already done, Ghost Walker. But these walls won't hold forever against determined men with enough ammunition. Rose closed her eyes and tried to block out the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Sheriff Briggs and his corrupt deputies were closing in, and she knew this wasn't just about money or territorial disputes. This was about silencing the only people who could expose their crimes, crimes that reached back 3 years to the night Ayanna died and Thomas was framed. A thunderous crash shook the cabin as the front door exploded inward. Rose bit her lip to keep from crying out, tasting blood as Little Bear buried his face against her shoulder. "Where are they, Ironwood?" Sheriff Briggs' voice boomed through the cabin. "The woman and the boy. Hand them over and maybe we'll let you live long enough to watch them hang." Samuel's reply was steady and cold. "You'll have to kill me first, Briggs, and that's assuming you can manage it." "Oh, I can manage it just fine. See, I brought some friends who don't much care about Cherokee treaties or territorial law. Meet Jake Murphy and his associates from the Dust Creek Mining Company." Rose's blood froze. Murphy, the man who had bid on them at the auction, whose scarred hands had reached for them like a predator claiming prey. She pressed her hand over Little Bear's mouth as footsteps moved across the floor above them. "You know what I find interesting, Ironwood?" Murphy's voice was a gravelly rasp that made Rose's skin crawl. "That pretty little Cherokee woman and her boy disappeared right after you bought them. Now here you are, holed up in a canyon with evidence that could hang half the territorial government. Awfully convenient, wouldn't you say?" "Say what you came to say, Murphy. I'm saying you made a mistake thinking you could hide them from us. See, we know all about your sister, how she got too close to our operation, started asking questions about missing cattle and dead Cherokee men. We took care of that problem 3 years ago, but it seems we didn't clean up all the loose ends." Rose felt Little Bear go rigid in her arms. Above them, Samuel's voice carried a deadly quiet that made the air itself seem to vibrate with danger. "You killed Ayanna. Burned her out like the vermin she was. Would have gotten the boy, too, if some do-gooder hadn't pulled him from the fire. Took us 3 years to track down who saved him, but Jake here's got a good memory for faces. Soon as he saw that woman at the auction, he knew we'd found our missing witness." Little Bear was barely 2 years old. He couldn't have witnessed anything. Murphy laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Maybe not, but that woman could." Rose Whitehawk saw things that night, things that could connect us to more than just cattle rustling, things that could hang us all. Rose's vision blurred as memories crashed over her like a flood. That terrible night 3 years ago, she had seen more than just the burning cabin. In the smoke and chaos, she had glimpsed men on horseback, watching the flames with satisfaction. She had heard voices, snatches of conversation about cleaning up loose ends and sending a message. At the time, she had been too focused on saving the child to process what she was witnessing. But now, with the voices of those same men echoing above her, the memories crystallized with horrifying clarity. A sudden barrage of gunfire erupted from multiple directions. The Cherokee men had engaged Murphy's associates, turning the canyon into a battleground. Rose heard Samuel curse as bullets splintered the wooden walls around them. "Crow Feather! They've got us pinned down!" "Not for long, Ghost Walker. My grandson should be arriving with reinforcements shortly." More gunfire, closer this time. Smoke began seeping through the floorboards, making Little Bear cough. Rose realized with growing horror that Murphy's men were trying to burn them out, the same tactic they had used on Ayanna. "Mama Rose," Little Bear whispered urgently. "The bad men are going to make fire like they did to Mama Ayanna. We have to help Uncle Ghost." "No, sweetheart, we have to stay hidden." But Little Bear was already pushing against the cellar door above them. "Uncle Ghost doesn't know about the back cave. Mama Ayanna showed me before the fire came. There's another way out." Rose stared at the child in the dim light filtering through the floorboards. Little Bear, you were barely 2 years old. How could you possibly remember? I remember everything about that night, Mama Rose. I remember Mama Ayana hiding me in the cave when the bad men came. I remember the fire and the screaming. I remember you pulling me out when Mama Ayana couldn't wake up anymore. His young voice carried a weight of memory that no 5-year-old should possess. And I remember seeing Uncle Ghost's face in the smoke, looking for us. The cabin shuddered as an explosion rocked the structure. Murphy's men had escalated to dynamite. Rose realized they weren't trying to capture anyone alive anymore. They were trying to eliminate all witnesses just as they had 3 years ago. "Show me," she whispered urgently. Little Bear led her through the root cellar to what appeared to be a solid earthen wall. But when he pressed against a specific section, it gave way, revealing a narrow tunnel that angled upward into darkness. Mama Ayana made Uncle Ghost promise to dig the tunnel in case the bad men came back. She knew they would someday. Little Bear crawled into the passage with the confidence of someone following a familiar path. It comes out behind the big rocks where the horses can't go. Rose followed, her dress catching on the rough stone walls. The tunnel was barely wide enough for an adult, clearly designed as a last resort escape route. And as they crawled through the suffocating darkness, she could hear the battle raging above them, gunfire, shouting voices, the crash of falling timber. They emerged behind a cluster of sandstone boulders 50 yards from the cabin. Rose's heart nearly stopped at what she saw. Murphy's men had the cabin completely surrounded, and flames were beginning to lick at the structure's eastern wall. Samuel and the Cherokee men were trapped inside, their ammunition clearly running low based on the decreasing frequency of return fire. "We have to help them," Rose said desperately, but she was one woman with no weapons and a 5-year-old child to protect. What could she possibly do against a dozen armed men? Little Bear tugged at her sleeve. "Mama Rose, look." He pointed toward the canyon's northern rim, where dust clouds indicated approaching riders. "Grandfather Crow Feather's people are coming." But even as relief flooded through her, Rose realized the reinforcements might arrive too late. The cabin was burning in earnest now, and she could see Murphy directing his men to positions that would prevent any escape. "There," she breathed, spotting Samuel's dark figure moving past a window. He was still alive, but for how much longer? It was then that Little Bear did something that would haunt Rose for the rest of her life. Without warning, the child stood up from their hiding place and walked calmly toward the burning cabin, his small voice carrying clearly across the canyon. "Stop hurting Uncle Ghost!" The gunfire ceased abruptly as every man in the canyon turned to stare at the tiny figure walking fearlessly toward them. Murphy's scarred face split into a predatory grin. "Well, well. Looks like our missing witness decided to save us the trouble of digging him out." He gestured to his men. "Grab the boy." But as 2 of Murphy's men moved toward Little Bear, the child did something extraordinary. He began to sing, not in English but in Cherokee, his pure young voice carrying an ancient song across the desert air. Rose recognized it as a death song, something warriors sang when facing their final battle. The Cherokee reinforcements crested the ridge at that exact moment, their war cries echoing off the canyon walls as they charged down the slope with rifles blazing. Murphy's men found themselves caught between the burning cabin and a superior force descending from above. In the chaos that followed, Rose saw Samuel burst from the cabin's back window, his clothes singed, but his purpose clear. He was moving toward Little Bear, who still stood in the open, still singing, still facing down grown men with nothing but a child's fierce courage. But Murphy had seen Samuel's movement too. The corrupt sheriff raised his rifle, taking aim not at the approaching Cherokee warriors, but at the man who represented his greatest threat. "This ends now, Ironwood!" Rose screamed Samuel's name as Murphy's finger tightened on the trigger. But her warning came too late. The rifle cracked like thunder, and Samuel staggered, blood blooming across his shirt as he fell to his knees in the dust. Little Bear's song faltered as he saw his beloved Uncle Ghost fall. For the first time since emerging from hiding, the child looked like what he was, a terrified 5-year-old watching his world collapse around him. And Rose realized that despite everything, the Cherokee reinforcements, the evidence against Murphy's gang, the promise of justice and safety, they were about to lose the man who had brought their strange family together. The man who had spent 3 years searching for them, who had risked everything to keep them safe, was bleeding out in the dirt while their enemies closed in for the kill. The battle for Red Rock Canyon had reached its climax, but Rose feared they were on the losing side of a war that had been raging since the night Ayanna died. A war that might claim Samuel's life before it was finally over. Time seemed suspended in that terrible moment as Samuel collapsed to his knees, his blood staining the desert sand. Rose watched in horror as Murphy advanced on the wounded man, his rifle aimed at Samuel's head for the killing shot. Little Bear stood frozen between them, his Cherokee death song dying in his throat as he witnessed his beloved Uncle Ghost falling. "Should have minded your own business, Ironwood," Murphy snarled, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Now you can join your sister in—" The rifle blast that echoed across the canyon didn't come from Murphy's weapon. Elder Crow Feather, despite his 70 years, had covered the distance from the ridge with the speed of a man half his age. His shot took Murphy in the shoulder, spinning the corrupt sheriff around and sending his rifle flying into the dust. But the reprieve was temporary. Murphy's remaining men regrouped quickly, using the burning cabin as cover while they returned fire on the Cherokee forces. Rose could see that despite their numerical advantage, Crow Feather's warriors were being pinned down by the defensive positions Murphy had established. Samuel struggled to his feet, one hand pressed against the spreading red stain on his shirt. "Rose!" he called out, his voice carrying across the gunfire. "Get Little Bear out of here!" But even as he spoke, 3 of Murphy's men were advancing on the child, who seemed paralyzed by the violence surrounding him. Rose made a decision that would have terrified her days ago, but now felt as natural as breathing. She broke from cover and ran toward Little Bear, ignoring the bullets that kicked up dust around her feet. She reached the child just as the nearest gunman extended his hand to grab him. Without thinking, Rose snatched up a fist-sized rock and brought it down on the man's wrist with all her strength. He howled and released Little Bear, but his companions were already closing in. "Mama Rose, this way!" Little Bear grabbed her hand and pulled her toward a narrow gap between 2 boulders, another escape route he remembered from his earliest childhood. They squeezed through just as gunfire erupted behind them, bullets sparking off the stone where they had been standing moments before. The gap led to a narrow ledge that ran along the canyon wall, invisible from below. Little Bear moved along it with the sure-footedness of a mountain goat, but Rose struggled to keep up, her dress catching on the rough stone and her vision blurred by tears of terror and rage. Below them, the battle had intensified. Samuel had found cover behind an overturned wagon, but his movements were increasingly sluggish as blood loss took its toll. Crow Feather's warriors were slowly gaining ground, but at a terrible cost. Rose could see bodies littering the canyon floor, both Cherokee and white. "We have to help them," Rose gasped as they reached a wider section of the ledge. Little Bear nodded solemnly. "Mama Ayanna told me what to do if the bad men came back. She said sometimes little people have to be brave in big ways." Before Rose could ask what he meant, Little Bear cupped his hands around his mouth and let out a piercing whistle that seemed to echo from every stone surface in the canyon. The sound was unlike anything Rose had ever heard, part bird call, part war cry, entirely eerie. The effect was immediate. Murphy's men looked around wildly, trying to locate the source of the sound. In their confusion, they exposed themselves to the Cherokee rifles. 3 more of Murphy's gang fell in quick succession, but the victory was short-lived. Murphy himself had found Samuel's position and was methodically working his way closer, despite his wounded shoulder. Rose could see that Samuel was barely conscious, his rifle forgotten in the dust beside him. "Uncle Ghost," Little Bear called out, his young voice carrying clearly across the canyon. "Remember what Mama Ayana taught you about the canyon spirits?" Samuel's head lifted slightly. Even from their distant perch, Rose could see understanding dawn in his eyes. He looked up at the canyon walls, then began moving with renewed purpose despite his injuries. Rose watched in amazement as Samuel crawled to a specific section of the canyon wall and pressed his hand against what appeared to be solid stone. A section of rock swung inward, another hidden passage, this one large enough for a grown man. "Ayana was full of surprises," Rose whispered. Samuel disappeared into the passage just as Murphy reached his former position. The corrupt sheriff cursed violently when he found nothing but blood-stained sand. His rage made him careless. He stepped into the open, scanning the canyon walls for any sign of his quarry. It was the opening Crow Feather had been waiting for. The elder's rifle spoke once more, and Murphy crumpled to the ground, clutching his leg. The fight went out of his remaining men immediately. Without their leaders driving hatred, they were just hired guns facing superior numbers and fighting on unfamiliar ground. "We surrender!" one of them called out, throwing down his rifle. "Don't shoot! We surrender!" The gunfire ceased as suddenly as it had begun, leaving only the crackle of the burning cabin and the moans of the wounded to break the desert silence. Rose and Little Bear made their way carefully down from the ledge, the child leading her along paths she never would have found on her own. They found Samuel collapsed just inside the hidden passage, unconscious but breathing. The bullet had passed through his shoulder, missing anything vital, but he had lost a dangerous amount of blood. Rose tore strips from her petticoat to bind the wound while Little Bear held Samuel's head in his small lap. "Is Uncle Ghost going to die?" the child asked with the matter-of-fact tone children use when confronting their worst fears. "No," Rose said firmly, though she wasn't entirely certain. "He's too stubborn to die. Besides, he promised to keep us safe, and your Uncle Ghost always keeps his promises." Crow Feather appeared at the passage entrance, his weathered face grim but satisfied. "Murphy is wounded but alive. He'll stand trial for his crimes, along with the others. Sheriff Briggs didn't survive the fight, took a Cherokee bullet through the heart." Rose felt a complex mixture of relief and sorrow. Justice had been served, but at a terrible cost. She could see Cherokee warriors tending to their own wounded, and she knew some of them wouldn't see another sunrise. "The cabin?" she asked. "Gone, but cabins can be rebuilt." Crow Feather knelt beside Samuel, checking his pulse with experienced hands. "He'll live, but he needs proper medical attention. We'll take him to our settlement. Our medicine woman has skill with bullet wounds." Little Bear looked up from where he was gently stroking Samuel's hair. "Will we all go together, as a family?" The elder smiled for the first time since the battle began. "Yes, child, as a family. The Cherokee Nation has officially adopted all 3 of you. You belong to us now, and we protect our own." As they carefully loaded Samuel onto a travois for the journey to the Cherokee settlement, Rose reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just a few short days. She had gone from being a desperate woman facing auction as human property to being a member of the Cherokee Nation, part of a family she never could have imagined. Little Bear walked beside Samuel's travois, one small hand resting on his uncle's arm. "I told him the canyon spirits would help," he said to Rose. "Mama Ayana said they always protect people who fight for what's right." Rose looked back at the smoldering remains of the cabin where they had briefly found peace, then at the canyon walls where ancient spirits had indeed seemed to aid their desperate fight. She thought about the hidden passages, the perfectly placed escape routes, and the way Little Bear had known exactly what to do when the moment of crisis came. Perhaps there were forces at work in this desert place that she didn't fully understand. Perhaps Ayana's spirit really did watch over them, guiding them through passages she had prepared for just such a day. Or perhaps it was simply the power of love and determination, the refusal to let evil triumph over innocence. Whatever the truth, Rose knew they had survived something that should have destroyed them. They had faced the men who killed Ayana and framed Thomas, and they had emerged victorious, not unscathed, but victorious nonetheless. As the Cherokee column began moving toward their distant settlement, Rose walked beside her chosen family. Samuel unconscious but breathing steadily, Little Bear chattering excitedly about everything he would show them in the Cherokee lands, and Elder Crowfeather sharing stories of other families who had been forged in fire and proven unbreakable. The sun was setting behind them, painting the canyon walls the color of blood and gold. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also hope. They were no longer running from their past. They were walking toward their future together. 2 weeks later, in the quiet infirmary of the Cherokee settlement, Samuel's eyes fluttered open to find Rose sitting beside his bed, her hands busy with mending, while Little Bear slept curled up in a chair nearby. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the window caught the silver threads in her dark hair, and for a moment Samuel wondered if he was dreaming. "You're awake," Rose said softly, setting down her needlework. "How do you feel?" Samuel tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain shot through his shoulder. "Like I've been shot," he managed, his voice hoarse from disuse. Rose's smile was gentle but strained. "You've been unconscious for 3 days. The Cherokee medicine woman said you lost more blood than your body could spare." "We weren't sure." She trailed off, but Samuel could read the fear that had haunted her in the dark circles under her eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I promised to keep you both safe, and instead I brought Murphy and his men right to your door." "Our door," Rose corrected firmly. "And you did keep us safe. All of us." She glanced at Little Bear, who stirred at the sound of voices but didn't wake. "He's been asking for you constantly. I finally convinced him to sleep by promising you'd be here when he woke up." Samuel felt his chest tighten with emotion that had nothing to do with his physical injuries. "Rose, there's something I need to tell you. About that night, 3 years ago. About what really happened to Ayana." Rose's hand stilled on her mending. "Samuel, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do." His blue eyes held hers with desperate intensity. "Because everything you think you know about that night is a lie. Everything I've told you is a lie." The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a dying fire. Rose set her sewing aside completely, her face pale but determined. "Then tell me the truth." "All of it." Samuel closed his eyes, gathering strength for a confession that had been eating at his soul for 3 years. "I wasn't just investigating cattle rustling when I came to this territory. I was hunting a specific man, Sheriff Briggs. He had killed my partner, another Pinkerton detective who got too close to evidence of territorial government corruption." "Your partner?" "A good man named William Chen. He had discovered that Briggs and Murphy weren't just stealing cattle. They were systematically targeting Cherokee families, murdering the men and selling the women and children to work camps in Mexico. It was ethnic cleansing disguised as law enforcement." Rose's hand flew to her mouth. "Dear God." William gathered evidence, documented names and dates, but before he could present his findings to federal authorities, Briggs had him killed, made it look like a riding accident. Samuel's voice grew harsh with remembered grief. I came to this territory for revenge, Rose. Not justice. Revenge. Little Bear stirred in his chair, murmuring something in Cherokee about bad dreams. Both adults looked at him with protective instincts, but the child settled back into sleep without fully waking. Samuel continued in a whisper. I tracked Briggs to this area, but I was careless. Ayanna saw me watching the sheriff's office in town, approached me thinking I might be another Cherokee man in trouble. When I told her I was investigating Briggs, she insisted on helping. She was trying to protect her people, Rose said quietly. She was brave and foolish and wonderful, Samuel agreed, his voice breaking slightly. She told me about families who had disappeared, about Cherokee men found dead under suspicious circumstances. She had been keeping records of her own, trying to document what was happening. Rose felt a chill of premonition. What did you do? I let her help me. God forgive me. I let her get involved because her information was invaluable. Together, we built a case that could have brought down not just Briggs and Murphy, but the entire network of corruption they represented. Samuel struggled to sit up higher, despite the pain. Rose moved to help him, adjusting his pillows while he gathered strength to continue. The night Ayanna died, we were supposed to meet at her cabin to finalize our evidence before I took it to federal authorities in Oklahoma City. But Briggs had been watching us. He and Murphy surrounded the cabin with a dozen men planning to kill us both and destroy everything we had gathered. But you weren't there, Rose said, understanding beginning to dawn in her eyes. I was late. My horse threw a shoe 5 miles out, and I had to walk. By the time I arrived, the cabin was already burning, and Ayanna was trapped inside. I tried to get to her, Rose. I swear on my sister's grave, I tried. Samuel's face was wet with tears he had held back for 3 years, but the roof had already collapsed. She was calling for help, calling for someone to save Little Bear. I could hear her voice, but I couldn't reach her. So you saw me pull him from the flames. I saw an angel, Samuel whispered. I saw a woman risk her life to save a child who wasn't even hers. I wanted to approach you, to explain who Little Bear was, but Murphy's men were still in the area. I followed you at a distance until I was sure you were safe. Then I went back for Ayanna. Rose's voice was barely audible. Was she? She lived long enough to make me promise something. She grabbed my hand and made me swear that I would find her son and the woman who saved him. She made me promise that I would protect you both, even if it took the rest of my life. The implications of his words settled over Rose like a heavy blanket. So, when you found us in Dust Creek, I had been searching for 3 years, following every lead, checking every Cherokee settlement, tracking rumors and whispers. When I heard about a Cherokee woman with a young boy facing debt problems in Dust Creek, I knew I had found you. Little Bear chose that moment to wake up, stretching and yawning before his eyes focused on Samuel's conscious form. "Uncle Ghost, you came back from the sleeping place." The child launched himself from his chair into Samuel's arms, careful of the wounded shoulder but desperate for contact. Samuel held him tightly, breathing in the scent of the boy's hair and feeling the solid warmth of young life against his chest. "I promised I wouldn't leave you, didn't I?" Samuel said softly. "Mama Rose said you always keep your promises." Little Bear pulled back to study Samuel's face seriously. "But you look sad. Are you sad because you had to tell the truth-telling story?" Samuel glanced at Rose over the child's head. "Maybe a little sad, yes. Sometimes truth-telling stories are hard to hear." Little Bear nodded solemnly. "Mama Ayanna told me that in the dream songs, she said Uncle Ghost carried big sadness because he thought he failed her. But he didn't fail. He just took longer to finish the promise." Rose felt her heart stop. "Little Bear, what exactly do the dream songs tell you?" The child settled more comfortably in Samuel's lap. his matter-of-fact tone chilling in its simplicity. Mama Ayana says she's not sad about the fire anymore because it brought all her favorite people together. She says Uncle Ghost was supposed to be my new papa all along, and you were supposed to be my new mama, but you both needed time to figure it out. Samuel stared at the child in wonder and growing horror. Little Bear, people don't really talk to us after they die. I know that, Little Bear replied patiently. But Mama Ayana isn't dead. She's dream alive. She lives in the place between sleeping and waking, where the spirits wait for their people to be safe before they go to the far country. Rose exchanged a look with Samuel that held equal parts skepticism and desperate hope. Whether Little Bear's dream songs were real spiritual communication or a child's way of processing trauma, they seemed to be guiding him toward healing rather than deeper wounds. Elder Crow. Feather appeared in the doorway, his timing impeccable as always. I see our patient has awakened. The medicine woman will want to check your wound, but first there are visitors who wish to speak with all of you. 3 figures entered behind him, a tall Cherokee woman with kind eyes, a federal marshal whose badge caught the sunlight, and a younger Cherokee man carrying an official-looking document. The marshal stepped forward first. Mr. Ironwood, I'm Marshal Davidson from Oklahoma City. I've come to inform you that the territorial investigation into Sheriff Briggs and Jake Murphy has been concluded. Based on evidence found at Murphy's ranch and testimony from surviving gang members, we've identified 17 Cherokee families who were murdered or sold into slavery over the past 5 years. Samuel felt Little Bear tense in his arms. What does that mean for us? It means justice, the Cherokee woman said, introducing herself as Sarah Ridge, a lawyer from the Cherokee Nation. It also means reparations. The territorial government is offering substantial compensation to surviving family members of Briggs and Murphy's victims. She handed the document to Rose. This is a legal adoption certificate, recognizing Little Bear as the son of both Rose Whitehawk and Samuel Ironwood under both Cherokee and territorial law. It also includes a deed to 160 acres of prime land in the Cherokee Territory, plus financial compensation for the losses your family suffered. Rose stared at the papers, hardly able to process what she was reading. We're actually a legal family. In every sense that matters, Sarah Ridge confirmed. The Cherokee Nation fought hard for these recognitions. Too many of our children have been lost to violence and displacement. When we find them again, we make sure they can never be taken away. Little Bear looked up at Samuel with bright eyes. Does this mean you're really my papa now? Not just Uncle Ghost? Samuel's voice was thick with emotion as he answered. If that's what you want, then yes. I'm really your papa now. And Mama Rose is really my mama? Rose leaned down to kiss the top of his head. I've been your mama from the moment I pulled you from that fire, sweetheart. Now it's just written down on official papers. Little Bear considered this seriously, then announced, I think Mama Ayana can go to the far country now. She doesn't need to stay in the dream songs anymore because we're all together and safe. As if summoned by his words, a gentle breeze stirred through the open window, carrying the scent of sage and prairie grass. For just a moment, Rose could have sworn she heard the faint echo of a woman's laughter, full of joy and relief and love. Whether it was imagination or something more, Rose chose to believe it was Ayana's blessing on their unlikely family. A blessing that had taken 3 years of searching, surviving, and learning to trust, but had finally brought them home. 1 year later, on a crisp October morning that painted the Oklahoma Territory in shades of gold and crimson, Rose stood on the porch of their new home, watching Samuel teach Little Bear to ride bareback. The Cherokee settlement had grown into a thriving community, and their house, built with territorial reparation money but designed with Cherokee traditions in mind, sat at the heart of it all. "Higher, Papa. I want to see over the corn stalks," Little Bear called out, his laughter carrying across the autumn fields. At 6 years old, he had grown tall and strong, his Cherokee heritage evident in his sure-footed grace and natural way with animals. More importantly, the haunted look that had shadowed his young eyes for so long had finally faded, replaced by the carefree joy every child deserved. Samuel lifted the boy higher onto the gentle mare's back, his movements easy and confident. The bullet wound had healed completely, leaving only a thin scar that Little Bear liked to trace with his finger while Samuel told bedtime stories. "Remember what I taught you about balance," Samuel said, steadying his son with gentle hands. "Feel the horse's rhythm, don't fight it." Rose smiled, her hand resting instinctively on the growing curve of her belly. The baby wouldn't arrive until spring, but already Little Bear was excitedly planning all the things he would teach his new brother or sister. "Cherokee words first," he had declared solemnly, "English words second, and horse riding third, after they're big enough not to fall off." Elder Crow Feather emerged from the house behind her, moving more slowly than he had a year ago, but still sharp as a blade. "The child has good seat," he observed, watching Little Bear guide the mare in careful circles around the paddock. "He'll be ready for his own pony soon." "Samuel's already been looking," Rose admitted. "Though he pretends it's for practical reasons, helping with the cattle and such." The old man chuckled. "Ghost Walker was never much good at hiding his feelings, especially where that boy is concerned. Speaking of which," he handed Rose an envelope bearing the seal of the territorial government. "This came with the morning mail." Rose opened it carefully, scanning the official letterhead before reading aloud. "Mr. and Mrs. Samuel Ironwood are hereby invited to the dedication of the Ayanna Crow Feather Memorial School to be held on November 15, 1886, in recognition of their contributions to Cherokee education and territorial justice." She looked up at Crow Feather with tears in her eyes. "They named the school after her." "As it should be. Ayanna always believed education was the path to true freedom for our people. Now Cherokee and white children will learn together in a building that bears her name. It's a fitting memorial." Samuel and Little Bear approached the porch, both covered in dust and grinning widely. "Mama Rose, did you see? I rode all the way around without Papa holding on," Little Bear announced proudly. "I saw, sweetheart. You looked just like a real Cherokee warrior." Rose knelt carefully to Little Bear's level, mindful of her growing belly. "And speaking of Cherokee traditions, Elder Crow Feather has something special to tell you." The old man's weathered face creased into a smile. "Young Yona, the Tribal Council has decided you're ready to begin learning the old stories, the creation tales, the hero legends, the wisdom songs that connect us to our ancestors. Would you like that?" Little Bear's eyes went wide with excitement. "The same stories Mama Ayanna knew? The ones she used to sing in the dream times?" "The very same." "Every Cherokee child should know where they come from, and you've waited long enough." Crow Feather placed a gentle hand on the boy's head. "Your parents have done well teaching you to walk in both worlds. Now it's time to deepen your roots in the Cherokee world." Samuel sat on the porch steps beside Rose, automatically pulling her close with his good arm. "Are you sure you're ready for that level of responsibility?" he asked Crow Feather with mock concern. "He asks a lot of questions." "The best students always do," the elder replied. "Besides, he'll need to know these stories when he starts school next year. Cherokee children should be proud of their heritage, not ashamed of it." Little Bear had been listening to this exchange with the serious expression he wore when processing important information. Will the other children know about Mama Ayanna? About how she helped Uncle Papa, catch the bad men? "They'll know," Rose assured him. The whole territory knows now. Your first mama was a hero, Little Bear. She saved a lot of people by being brave enough to stand up for what was right. Just like you did, Mama Rose, and just like Papa did. Little Bear climbed onto the porch and settled between his parents, his small body warm against Rose's side. I want to be brave like that too when I grow up. Samuel ruffled his son's hair affectionately. You already are brave. It takes courage to love people, to trust them, to build a family from broken pieces. You've been doing that since you were 2 years old. As the afternoon sun slanted lower across their land, painting everything in warm golden light, Rose reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago she had been a desperate woman facing auction as human property. Now she was Rose Ironwood, respected member of the Cherokee Nation, expectant mother, and wife to a man whose love had literally saved her life. "What are you thinking about?" Samuel asked softly, noticing her contemplative mood. Rose smiled, watching Little Bear chase fireflies across their front yard as dusk began to fall. "I'm thinking about gratitude, about how sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things, about how family isn't just blood, it's choice and love and never giving up on each other." Samuel squeezed her hand gently. "Ayanna would be proud of what we've built here, all of us together." "She is proud," Little Bear called out from the yard, his voice certain and peaceful. "The dream songs don't come anymore because she doesn't need to watch over us. But sometimes, when the wind blows just right through the corn, I can hear her laughing." Rose and Samuel exchanged a look of wonder and acceptance. Whether it was imagination, spiritual truth, or simply a child's beautiful way of processing loss and love, it brought them comfort. Their family had been forged in fire and tragedy, but it had emerged stronger than any bonds of mere blood could ever be. As the first stars appeared in the Oklahoma sky, Rose Ironwood counted her blessings. A husband who had searched 3 years to keep a promise, a son who carried the best of 2 worlds in his heart, a community that had embraced them all, and a future bright with possibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new opportunities to choose love over fear, but tonight they were simply a family gathered on their own front porch, complete and grateful and home at last. In Cherokee, the word for such contentment was NVHI, the deep peace that comes from knowing you are exactly where you belong. And for the first time in her life, Rose Ironwood truly understood what that meant. Sometimes life's greatest treasures come disguised as our deepest trials. Rose Whitehawk's story reminds us that family isn't defined by blood alone. It's forged through choice, sacrifice, and unwavering love. When she stood on that auction block, clutching Little Bear, she couldn't imagine that her darkest hour would lead to her greatest blessing. Samuel's 3-year search for redemption, Little Bear's innocent wisdom bridging 2 worlds, and Rose's courage to trust again created something beautiful from broken pieces. Their journey from desperation to hope mirrors what many of us have experienced, losing everything we thought we needed, only to discover what we truly couldn't live without. In our golden years, we understand that the most meaningful relationships often emerge from unexpected places. The neighbors who become family, the second chances that lead to deeper love, the grandchildren who teach us joy we never knew existed. Rose found her NVHI, that deep Cherokee peace of knowing you're exactly where you belong. Perhaps that's the gift of growing older, recognizing that our scars tell stories of survival, our losses make room for unexpected grace, and our capacity for love only deepens with time. True family means never giving up on each other, no matter how long the journey home takes. What unexpected relationship has brought the greatest joy to your later years? Have you ever discovered that a painful experience led to an unexpected blessing? Share your story in the comments below. Your journey might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.